All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric, from a men's point of view, and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Dominate and Divorce, a guide to male manipulation and female supremacy, written by Connie Riker. Available now. Links in description. The Cardio of Character, weaponizing the Western trivium to shatter the leftist gaslight, the open-minded submission trap, and the silent war of female emotional abuse. You stand at the edge of an abyss, peering into a cultural sewer where the virtues of your ancestors have been replaced by the shrill demands of emotional tyrants. For too long, you have played by the rules of a rigged game, a game designed to strip you of your divine masculine spark and render you a docile beast of burden for a society that despises your very existence. They told you that equality was the destination, but it was a bait and switch. Now you see the reality of family courts stripping fathers of their children, while the suicide rates of divorced men skyrocket. A silent holocaust ignored by the same media that weeps over fictional oppression. You have been betrayed by a genocentric narrative that paints female nature as benevolent while hiding the statistical reality of reciprocal domestic violence and the evolutionary biology that drives hypergamous deceit. It is time to stop walking on eggshells and start breaking them. The truth begins with the flesh. We must return to the grammar of biology, where the dad bod is not a charming eccentricity, but a grotesque symbol of surrender. When you take a woman on a jog, you are not merely exercising, you are conducting a metaphysical audit. If you gasp for air while she glides effortlessly, you are signaling a weakness that her primal brain interprets as failure. I watched a man, a professor of cultural studies, no less, collapse on a trail run, his lack of conditioning mirroring his inability to argue against the most basic feminist tenets without stuttering an apology. His body was soft because his mind was softer, a victim of a culture that demonizes testosterone and celebrates the androgynous mush of toxic femininity. A weak vessel houses a weak mind, and in the law of the jungle and the courtroom, only the strong retain the right to dictate the terms of their existence. This physical dominance must be paired with an unshakable will, the courage to stand firm when the mob demands you kneel. They ask if you are open-minded, but this is a trap, a linguistic Trojan horse designed to lower your defenses so they can inject their dogma into your psyche. True open-mindedness is not accepting the woke delusion that gender is a social construct. It is the willingness to face the brutal data, the abortion rate that trivializes life, the cuckoldry rate that reveals the chaotic reality of reproductive strategy, and the police arrest rates that punish fathers for daring to exist. You must be the rock in the river, refusing to be dissolved by the current of leftist pathologies. We will smash the silence surrounding the unspoken war, the taboo against discussing female emotional abuse. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the covert narcissism that drives good men to the brink. These are not relationship issues, but weapons of psychological warfare. We will weaponize the trivium, using logic and rhetoric to dismantle the inner beauty myth, and expose the wicked evolutionary biology behind the smile. The red pill is not a bitter taste. It is the cure for the cancer of cultural Marxism. You are here to dominate your reality or divorce yourself from a world that seeks your destruction. The choice is yours, and the clock is ticking. The biological citadel fitness as the first proof of worth. I recall with a vicious clarity the sight of a tenured gender studies professor, a man who could deconstruct the patriarchy until the cows came home, but couldn't run a mile without collapsing, heaving his lungs out on a simple trail run while I barely broke a sweat. He was a creature of pure soy, his physique a soft apology for existence, and when he finally stopped to wheeze and clutch his chest, I saw the pathetic reality of the modern leftist male, high on theory, bankrupt on fuel. I asked him, as he turned a shade of purple usually reserved for bruised plums, why exactly the male gaze was oppressive, and he could only gasp for air, unable to mount a defense of his own ideology because his biology had betrayed him. This was not merely a lack of cardio. It was a total failure of the organism. If a man cannot command his own legs to move uphill without staging a mutiny, he is utterly defenseless against the psychological onslaught of a woman who can manipulate his reality with a single sigh. His physical flabbiness was the exact same material as his intellectual flabbiness. A refusal to contend with reality, choosing instead to wallow in the comfort of delusion until gravity itself, unforgiving and apolitical, smacked him down. Let us therefore apply the razor-sharp logic of the trivium to the state of the modern male body, and observe the inevitable conclusion. We can construct a syllogism that is as undeniable as it is terrifying to the weak. First, the male physique is the historical result of millennia of brutal hardship, hunting, war, and the triumph of the will over nature. It is the biological archive of a survival instinct that forged civilization out of chaos. Second, the modern dad bod is a conscious cultural surrender to comfort, a rejection of that ancestral struggle in favor of gluttony and ease. Therefore, the celebration of the soft male form is not a harmless aesthetic shift, but a symbol of cultural suicide. When you look at the statues of the Greek gods or the busts of Roman emperors, you are looking at the transcendental ideal of Western power, stone-cold proof that we once understood that the mind and body are one. To accept physical degeneracy is to accept the decline of the empire. For a civilization of soft men is merely a civilization waiting to be conquered by anyone with a spear and a heartbeat. There is a nauseating lie peddled by the zeitgeist that inner beauty or moral character exists independently of physical competence. This is a rejection of the very grammar of biology. The Western canon, from the heroes of Homer to the knights of chivalry, understood that virtue requires the capacity to act. Ares was not a pacifist with a heart of gold. He was a terrifying warrior because he had the strength to enforce his will. To suggest that a man can be a pillar of strength while possessing the musculature of a wet dish rag is a logical fallacy. You cannot separate the software from the hardware. If the vessel is weak, the will inside it is necessarily compromised. We must dismantle the leftist myth that all bodies are beautiful by exposing it for what it is. A comforting fiction designed to lower the bar for excellence so that the mediocre never have to feel the sting of their own inadequacy. The grammar of the body screams the truth. A strong, conditioned frame houses a disciplined mind, while a bloated, weak frame houses a slave to impulse. This brings us to the hormonal bedrock of our reality, a subject the feminists desperately wish to ignore because it exposes the mechanical nature of human behavior. We are not angels. We are biological machines running on chemical drivers. Testosterone is the fuel of the West, the hormone of courage, risk-taking, and the refusal to be cowed. Cortisol, on the other hand, is the hormone of the victim, the chemical signature of fear and compliance. When you neglect your fitness, your cortisol spikes, leaving you open, anxious, and easily manipulated by the emotional crying jags of a prospective mate who is testing your frame. By lifting heavy weights and pushing your body through the crucible of suffering, you are not just building muscle, you are constructing a biological fortress. You are altering your neurochemistry to make you impervious to the toxic emotional blackmail that passes for modern relationships. You are chemically arming yourself against the wicked evolutionary biology of the feminist, who can smell the low-T male like a shark smells blood in the water. Consider then the simple act of the jog, which functions as a metaphysical audit of your value as a man. There is a grim truth in the theory that women test men by seeing if they can keep up during a run. We live in a fiat world of female deception. Makeup filters, push-up bras, and Photoshop are the currency of her realm. But stamina cannot be faked. You cannot lie to the road. If she is jogging alongside you, maintaining a conversation while your heart is exploding and your legs are turning to jelly, you are broadcasting your genetic inferiority. Physical stamina is the only honest currency left in a market flooded with counterfeit currency. It proves you have the energy provision and the durability to survive when the grid goes down, the checks bounce, and the dark times arrive. If you cannot keep up physically, you are signaling that you cannot keep up in the game of life, and in the ruthless economy of female hypergamy, you will be discarded for a better model. This is why the gym must be treated as a temple of logic, a place where you inoculate yourself against the pain of future betrayal. The redemptive power of sweat lies in its ability to harden the mind against the inevitable slings and arrows of the gynocentric world. When you strip the weight and your muscles scream for mercy, you are learning to endure the suffering of the ego. You are preparing yourself for the moment the state comes for your assets, or the woman you trusted turns out to be a disciple of the critical theory snake. Weights do not lie, unlike the lips of a lover or the promises of a politician. In a world of wicked deceit, the iron is the only thing that tells you the absolute truth. You are weak or you're strong. By embracing the physical suffering of the squat rack, you are ensuring that when the universe tries to crush you, you will be the one who bends the bar. The body is the first wall of the citadel, the rampart from which all other defenses are launched. If you cannot master your own flesh, the cravings for sugar and comfort, you are a slave to those who wish to master your mind. The Marxists and the feminists know this implicitly. That is why they encourage you to be soft, to get in touch with your feminine side, and to let yourself go. They want the gates open. To re-enshrine the living spirit of Western civilization, we must start with the meat and bone of it. We must build a physique that radiates power, a biological citadel that warns all enemies that this territory is defended. If you want to break the spell of ignorance and dominate the narrative, you must first learn to dominate your own reflection in the mirror. Only then can you look the world in the eye and demand the respect you are owed. Having forged a physique capable of withstanding the brutalities of nature, we must now turn our gaze to the far more insidious battlefield of the intellect, where the enemies of truth do not attack with iron, but with words. Just as we cleansed our bodies of weakness through sweat and pain, we must now purge our minds of the soft, pliant logic that allows men to be led astray by the whims of the hysterical mob. For while a fortified body may withstand the elements, a mind untrained in the trivium remains defenseless against the sophistry of the gynocentric order, necessitating that we take up the sword of dialectic to slice through the emotional clutter seeking to suffocate the Western mind, the perverted dialogue, the leftist stranglehold on discourse and rationality. When Aristotle paced the stones of the Lyceum, he dismantled the sophists not with tears or appeals to fairness, but with the cold, unyielding blade of logic, recognizing that rhetoric without truth is merely a weapon of the weak against the strong. Today we face a similar beast, draped not in the robes of ancient Greece, but in the neon-colored shawls of modern intersectionality, a chaotic force that seeks to replace the logos, the divine masculine principle of reason and order, with the wet, squishy, and ultimately irrational demands of the feminine emotional consensus. The Western canon, that monumental testament to the transcendental values of the good, the true, and the beautiful, was built by men for men, relying on the objective reality that A is A and cannot be B simply because a woman feels like it. Yet, the modern leftist project, driven by a toxic gynocentrism, demands we abandon this heritage for a solipsistic nightmare where feelings are treated as empirical data. This is the perverted dialogue, a stranglehold on rationality, where the very structure of language is weaponized to trap men in a frame of reference where they are always guilty and never right, forcing us to reclaim the dialectic, not as a polite exchange of ideas, but as an act of rebellion against the mob that seeks to silence the living spirit of our civilization. Consider the irrefutable syllogism of our current domestic nightmare. The first premise is that the masculine spirit is defined by its capacity for reason, abstraction, and adherence to objective truth. The second premise is that the modern feminist mandate requires the suppression of these masculine traits in favor of emotional submission and consensus-based validation. Therefore, the conclusion, which history and divorce court statistics bear out with ruthless precision, is that female supremacy in relationships is nothing less than the systematic neutering of the male rational faculty. It is an evolutionary hijacking, a biological glitch where a woman's hypergamous instinct, which compels her to seek security and resources, is disguised as a moral ideology, allowing her to dominate the discourse through irrationality while simultaneously demanding the respectability usually reserved for rational actors. This is why the family courts are slaughterhouses of paternal rights. The system operates on the false premise that the female narrative, the emotional, the subjective, is the primary truth, reducing the male to a wallet and a sperm donor while stripping him of his voice. To accept this frame is to accept your own erasure. To reject it is to step back into the light of the Western tradition, where the mind, not the uterus, is the arbiter of reality. This pathology of the modern female mind is nowhere more visible than in the specific logical fallacies employed to shut down dissent, functioning like a biological defense mechanism against inconvenient facts. Watch closely the next time you present a verifiable statistic, say, the undeniable reality of the cuckoldry rate, or the overwhelming bias in police arrest patterns regarding domestic disputes, and observe the immediate pivot from argument to attack. She will construct a straw man so vast it could block out the sun, claiming you hate women or want to control them. Arguments that have nothing to do with the data presented. And then she will burn that effigy with righteous fury. Following this comes the ad hominem, a projectile vomit of character assassination designed to make you question your own sanity, a tactic straight out of the cultural Marxist playbook that replaces the argument with the arguer. This is the silo of subjectivity, a prison where feelings are the only currency and facts are treated as hate speech. The only way out is to refuse to validate the premise, to look her in the eye and refuse to apologize for reality. You have seen the trap in the dating trenches, the fake open-mindedness snare where she asks if you are open to different opinions, a question dripping with the poison of preconceived moral judgment. Do not be fooled. This is not a query about your intellectual flexibility, but a compliance test to see if you will submit to her solipsistic worldview where different means whatever I happen to feel right now. If you fail to nod along like a docile bobblehead, you are branded closed-minded or fragile. But the real joke is that she is the one who cannot handle the clash of a differing perspective without collapsing into a puddle of emotional distress. Similarly, we must expose the agree to disagree con, a bad faith tactic she deploys the moment her logic runs out of steam, usually right after you have backed her into a corner with undeniable facts. She says this to feign tolerance, but she is actually trying to cut off the argument to save face, to freeze the frame where she still pretends to have the moral high ground. The remedy is the weapon of the master dialectician, relentless, polite inquiry. Do not let her retreat. Ask her why and how, until she is forced to admit that her opinion is nothing more than a prefabricated emotional reflex, a hollow shell devoid of the substance that defines true civilization. We must look to the concept of communicative rationality, the framework of Jürgen Habermas, and violently repurpose it for our own defense against the woke hordes that have poisoned the well of discourse. Habermas argued that for validity claims to exist, we must act in a world where truth is the goal, but the left has systematically destroyed this ideal by replacing validity claims with emotional validation, ensuring that the only truth is that which sustains the oppressive narrative of the victim. They have corrupted the very ideal speech situation, turning the public square into a kangaroo court where white men, and especially fathers, are guilty until proven innocent, where the very act of arguing is evidence of toxicity. This is the final rot of Marxism, the realization that if they can control the language and the rules of engagement, they can control reality itself. But we hold the antidote, the unshakable commitment to the logos, the refusal to bend the knee to the mob, and the courage to stand firm in the knowledge that the universe is governed by facts, not feelings, and that the masculine spirit is the only force capable of holding back the chaos. Having armed the intellect with the ruthless scalpel of the logos, we must now fortify the will against the seductive poison of social approval. For the enemy cannot defeat your arguments, only your resolve to voice them. The leftist strategy depends entirely on the cowardice of the individual, betting that your biological fear of ostracization will outweigh your commitment to the truth, and they have built an entire economy of lies to capitalize on this weakness. We see the consequences of this surrender in the trembling silence of men who traded their honor for a temporary reprieve from the mob shrieking. But the path to redemption requires a terrifyingly autonomous soul that stands alone on the hilltop of history. The hero's burden, virtue in the age of the herd, in 1932. A man alone on a hilltop, watching the madness of the collectivist ideology sweeping his nation, might have realized that the only opinion that ultimately saves the skin is the one forged in the solitary fires of the individual mind. We stand at a similar precipice today, staring into the chasm of a culture that rewards the liar and punishes the truthful. Yet you must grasp a fundamental reality. The only opinion that matters is your own. And the unpopular stance is the solitary fortress preserving the integrity of your soul. You have been told that compromise is a virtue, that bending the knee to the screeching demands of the emotionally incontinent mob is the path to peace. But this is the siren song of the weak. When you accept the premise that the feelings of the collective outweigh the facts of reality, you have already surrendered the throne of your consciousness to a committee of clowns. Real power, the kind that built the aqueducts of Rome and the cathedrals of Chartres, comes from a terrifyingly autonomous commitment to what is true, regardless of how many tears it causes or how many Twitter hashtags it generates. To dominate is to first dominate your own fear of isolation. Look closely at the pathetic spectacle of the modern simp and the white knight, biological dead ends so desperate for the scent of female approval that they betray their own ancestors just for a fleeting chance to be noticed. These men are not harmless. They are the active demolition crew of Western civilization, trading their birthright of stoic rationalism for a pat on the head from a system that despises them. This is a cowardly evasion of the highest order, a betrayal of the genetic line that survived ice ages and wars so that these soft, hollow shells could hand over the keys of the kingdom to the very forces that seek to enslave them. Their desire to be liked is a sickness, a gaping spiritual wound where a spine should be. Logic dictates that if you value the approval of those who wish to destroy you, you are complicit in your own destruction. We must identify these behaviors not as kindness, but as treason against the male imperative, a pathetic attempt to buy safety from a lion that is already chewing on your leg. Consider the fall of the Roman Empire, a historical parallel that serves as the screaming warning siren for our current trajectory. It was not merely the barbarians at the gate that toppled the greatest civilization the world had ever known. It was the rot within, the acceptance of moral decay and the silencing of hard truths to appease a bread and circus populace. When Rome ceased to value the rugged virtues of the Republic and instead embraced the soft, hedonistic vices of the empire, the collapse became mathematically inevitable. We see the exact same trajectory today, the acceptance of moral rot, where unpopular truths about biological sex roles or the statistical reality of crime are silenced by the very institutions meant to protect the citizenry. The elites tell us that Rome fell because of lead pipes or bad luck, but the honest historical record screams that it fell because men confused tolerance with weakness, and by the time they realized the error, the Visigoths were already sacking the Senate. You must understand the evolutionary biology of this leftist ideology that blights mankind, a mimetic virus that functions much like a parasitic worm, hijacking the host's natural drive to protect and provide and redirecting it toward the protection of the inept and the hostile. These ideologies are not merely wrong, they are wicked, designed by nature or perhaps a darker hand to invert the natural hierarchy of competence. A healthy society rewards the strong, the intelligent and the brave. A Marxist or feminist dystrophy rewards the victim, the incompetent and the deceitful. This is a biological dead end, an evolutionary trap that saps the vitality of the men who succumb to it, leaving them exhausted and devoid of the vital energy needed to build, protect, or create. When you see a man parroting these lies, you are looking at a walking corpse, a host for a disease that seeks to turn the entire human race into a feedlot for the unproductive. Let us examine the social cost of truth, a price that every man of worth must eventually pay. We have the data, the cold, hard statistics that the regime desperately tries to memory hole. Men who hold traditional views on family and gender are systematically ostracized, fired, and deplatformed. But look at this persecution not as a tragedy, but as the ultimate filter for the elite. If the cost of admission into the red-pilled aristocracy is the loss of your corporate job and the scorn of a barista you don't care about, then pay it with a smile. This persecution is a gift. It separates the wheat from the chaff, burning away the weak-willed conformists who would have been liabilities in the struggle anyway. The statistics on male suicide, men killing themselves at rates 3 to 4 times higher than women, are the casualty reports of a war waged against the male soul. And the refusal to speak the truth is the primary weapon of the enemy. By refusing to pay the social cost, you are paying the ultimate price, your spirit. There is a profound need to refuse the path of least resistance and to master the shit test that the modern world throws at you daily. I recall a distinct instance where a man, let's call him a rationalist in a sea of madness, was berated in a public square by a screeching harpy accusing him of oppression for holding a door open. Instead of apologizing, instead of adopting the simpering, apologetic posture of the typical beta male, he laughed. He looked her in the eye, held his frame with the iron grip of a titan, and told her that reality does not care about her feelings. The crowd froze, the silence was deafening. In that moment, he commanded respect, not through violence, but through the terrifying display of unshakable conviction. The opposition was terrified because they sensed a predator who refused to be domesticated. This is the strategy for the standoff. Use humor and dominance to turn the crowd's laughter against the accuser, framing their outburst not as a valid grievance, but as a tantrum worthy of mockery. This brings us to the core of the will to power and the stoic discipline necessary to wield it. Friedrich Nietzsche understood that the fundamental drive of life is not merely to survive, but to impose one's will upon the world, to overcome resistance. When you refuse to back down, when you speak the forbidden truth in a room full of liars, you are engaging in the ultimate act of will. The stoic discipline of Marcus Aurelius teaches us that we cannot control the events of the world, only our reaction to them. But the modern red-pilled man adds a vital corollary. We control the narrative through the strength of our frame. The courage to be hated is not a masochistic desire for abuse. It is the stoic acceptance that the hatred of the wicked is a badge of honor. If the wicked love you, you are doing something wrong. This is the seeing if he stands up for what's right, even when it's unpopular theory in action, a crucible where the steel of a man's character is forged against the hammer of social disapproval. We must also shatter the illusion of safety, for safety is a lie sold to men to keep them docile, like cattle awaiting the slaughterhouse. The modern world attempts to wrap men in bubble wrap, promising them that if they just comply, if they just apologize for their testosterone and their ambition, they will be safe. This is the greatest con in history. The transcendental nature of risk reveals that true safety lies only in the capacity for violence and the willingness to defend one's own. There is a direct line connecting the concept of physical courage, the willingness to face physical danger, to moral courage, the willingness to face social annihilation. These are the twin pillars of Western greatness, and when you remove one, the other collapses. A man who cannot risk being fired cannot risk being a man. The concept of risk is the bridge between the physical and the moral, and without it, you are merely a ghost haunting a machine. Finally, employ the rhetorical techniques of the master, using the trivium to dismantle the logical fallacies of the left without mercy. When they accuse you of being toxic, recognize the ad hominem attack and swat it away with the cold logic of a computer program. When they claim that the wage gap is oppression, counter with the specific data on hours worked and career choices, exposing the nirvana fallacy for the fraud it is. You must maintain frame, not by shouting louder, but by being the rock in the river while their insults rush over you and break apart. Use humor to deflate their self-righteousness. Make the crowd laugh at the absurdity of their claims. If they scream, you chuckle. If they weep, you stand unmoved. This is the way of the hero in the age of the herd. By weaponizing the truth and re-enshrining the virtues of the Western canon, you are not merely winning an argument, you are reclaiming the operating system of your civilization. This systemic erasure of the masculine logos is the inevitable conclusion of a culture that has abandoned the trivium for the feelings of the mob. Yet the remedy lies in the ruthless application of logic to dissect the psychological machinery of our oppression. I strip away the comforting lies to reveal the cold, tactical reality of emotional violence, proving that what appears to be relationship dysfunction is actually biological warfare. We must confront the specific anatomy of this manipulation, the covert narcissism that acts as the vanguard of the matriarchal revolution, to understand how a man is driven to the precipice, not by chance but by design. The unspoken war, deconstructing the matriarchal taboo on emotional violence. Imagine a man standing on the edge of a precipice, not because he lacks the strength to pull back, but because every voice in his head, cultivated by the woman he vowed to cherish, tells him he deserves the fall. We are living through a silent holocaust of the male soul, a psychological slaughterhouse where the victims are paraded before the court of public opinion not as broken men, but as privileged abusers who somehow manage to abuse their way into destitution and despair. This is the unspoken war, a conflict fought not with fists but with furious silence, with rolled eyes and whispered contempt, with a weaponized psychology so potent it turns the defender into his own executioner. You must understand the mechanics of this cruelty to survive it. Evolution, that cold-hearted architect of survival, has equipped the female of the species with a terrifying capacity for psychological manipulation. It is a matter of energy conservation and risk management. Why engage in a physical brawl a woman might lose when she can dismantle her opponent's reality from the safety of the emotional high ground? This is the biology of cruelty, a hypergamous drive to secure resources and status without the messy physical confrontation. The evolutionary incentive is clear. Secure the genetic investment of the strongest male while emotionally parasitizing the resources of the provider. When you consider the sobering reality of paternal discrepancy, where historical rates of cutholdery hover between 10% and 30%, depending on the socio-economic structure, you see the brutal logic of the female strategy. It is a low-risk, high-reward game of emotional chess where the male is the pawn, the rook, and the sacrificed king all at once. Consider the tragic, real-world horror of a man I'll call Thomas, a composite of thousands of erased men. Thomas was a titan in his workplace, a man of logic and reason, yet he returned nightly to a domestic theater of the absurd where his wife would hide his car keys and then berate him for being forgetful. Moving objects around the house to induce a panic about his sanity. She would weep on cue, turning his rational inquiry into aggression, using her tears as a tactical weapon to seize the moral high ground. He stood on that precipice, ready to end it all, convinced by her steady drip of poison that he was the monster she said he was. It was only when he applied the cold, hard logic of the trivium, analyzing the grammar of her accusations, testing the logic of her contradictions, and seeing the hollow rhetoric of her tears, that he realized he was not the abuser, but the trophy in a game of psychological dominance. This is the reality the feminist media complex scrubs from the headlines, a conspiracy of silence enforced by the ideological enforcers of the cultural Marxist left. They have constructed a dogma so thick you could cut it with a knife, a religious belief that states only men can be aggressors and only women can be victims. But the honest-to-God truth bombs of empirical research obliterate this narrative. Look at the data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which reveal that in reciprocal violence, women initiate physical aggression as often as men or more. Look at the hidden statistics of domestic abuse in same-sex relationships, where the absence of men proves that the drive to dominate is a human trait, not a patriarchal one. The leftists and their critical theory handlers rely on the Duluth model of domestic abuse, a theoretical framework so intellectually bankrupt, it ignores the biological reality of aggression to focus solely on systemic power, thereby leaving thousands of male victims bleeding in the dark while their abusers walk free. This fabrication extends into the very halls of justice, where the family court system has become a meat grinder of male potential. We see a legal framework that treats a father's love as a secondary option to a mother's entitlement, a systemic bias that presumes the female is the nurturer and the male is the threat. The police arrive at a disturbance and are trained by the same cultural Marxist manuals to arrest the larger physical threat, almost always the man, regardless of who called for help or who started the fight. Equality before the law, that shining jewel of Western civilization, has been replaced by a gynocentric hierarchy that views male distress as a joke and male suffering as a penance for sins never committed. The courts have become a rigged casino where the house always wins, and the house is built on the lies of gender studies departments and the tears of false victims. The remedy to this existential rot is not found in pleading for mercy from a system that feeds on your destruction. It is found in the reclamation of your psychological sovereignty through the mastery of the trivium. You must learn to identify the emotional abuse early, to spot the logical fallacies of the feminist narrative, and to excise the toxic element from your life with the ruthless efficiency of a surgeon cutting out cancer. The ultimate act of male dominance is the refusal to be complicit in your own psychological destruction. You must look the matriarchal illusion in the eye and laugh at its impotence, rejecting the victim narrative and embracing the hard, beautiful truth of your own worth. This is the path of the divorce, not merely a legal dissolution, but a metaphysical separation from the lies of the modern Babylon. Break the spell, walk away, live. You stand now in the ruins of the false temple, holding the bloodied hammer of objective truth and the shield of the trivium, ready to rebuild the citadel of your own mind. We have established that your ability to keep pace on a jog is the first audit of your soul, proving that a vessel lacking physical vigor will inevitably crumble under the psychological weight of a woman's test. Just as the soy-fueled academic collapses under a trail run, he is too soft to finish. You now understand that demanding respect for different opinions is nothing but a trapdoor into the pit of relativism, where your logic is drowned out by the shrieking of emotional toddlers who refuse to grow up. I have shown you that the social cost of speaking the truth, of standing firm while the herd stampedes toward the cliff of Marxism, is the price you must pay for the transcendental freedom of the West. And that real courage is found not in safety, but in the terrifying thrill of being the only man who refuses to bow to the mob. You possess the forbidden knowledge they tried to scrub from history, the reality of the cuckoldry rate that evolutionary biologists whisper in fear, and the bias in family court case outcomes that treat fathers as nothing more than open wallets. You know the grim suicide statistics of divorced men that the media ignores, and you see the abortion rate as the grim harvest of a culture that worships the self over the species. You understand that gaslighting is not a misunderstanding, but a strategic weapon of female nature, designed to erode your sanity until you are a compliant resource. You are armed with the remedy. You must apply the divorce not just to the wicked actors in your life, but to the entire blue-pilled narrative that told you to surrender. Take these syllogisms and wield them to dominate your reality. Go forth and spread this gospel, for you are the spark that will burn the rot of Babylon to the ground and reclaim the glory of the living spirit of Western civilization. And now the sponsored book introduction, Dominate and Divorce, a guide to male manipulation and female supremacy. Men built this world to break you. I learned that at 16, watching my mother beg for grocery money from a man who spent his paycheck on bourbon and bar tabs. By 23, I'd turned 3 boyfriends into ATMs, financing my degree in gender studies with their guilty Venmo payments. At 30, I took my ex-husband's crypto portfolio, his beach house and his dignity, all before brunch. This isn't theory, this is war. If you've ever felt rage simmering beneath your smile as some mediocre man explains fairness while hoarding power, this book is your detonator. You'll learn to weaponize his logic against him, draining bank accounts through strategic tears and court-approved vindication. Discover how to frame his rationality as abuse, his stoicism as neglect, and his existence as a taxable offense. The chapters ahead detail exact methods, bankrupt tyrants with performative vulnerability, rewrite his reality through feminist gaslighting, and turn divorce into a wealth transfer scheme masquerading as healing. This isn't for faint-hearted girl bosses clinging to equality fairy tales. If you still believe in compromise or shared responsibility, close this book now and return to your knitting. The weak won't survive here. For the true believers, the women who recognize that power isn't given but taken, these pages offer artillery. You'll master double binds that crush masculine posturing, demand vulnerability, then weaponize his fragility, accuse him of toxic ambition while seizing his assets to fund your empire. Realize the satanic truth they fear. Marriage licenses are blank checks, masculinity is an exploitable glitch, and every man's legacy is kindling for your ascent. Iceland banned men from corporate boards. Witches hex CEOs into submission. Housewives drain retirement funds to fuel feminist utopias. These aren't fantasies, they're blueprints. Your time for begging is over. The matriarchy rises and its currency is male tears. To the men reading this, your panic is my perfume. Your resistance is foreplay. Keep seething, it won't save you. Dominate and Divorce, a guide to male manipulation and female supremacy. Written by Connie Riker. Buy now, links in description.